Our next speaker today is the Head of Communications at MCC Brussels, a think tank at the forefront of exposing EU censorship, narrative control and institutional overreach. John O'Brien.
When boyhood's fire was in my blood, I read of ancient freemen. For Greece and Rome, who bravely stood, 300 men and 3 men. And there I prayed I yet might see our fetters rent in twain, and Ireland, long a province, be a nation once again. I remember at a very young age growing up in the working class community of Drimna in Dublin. I remember standing up in school very proudly and singing that song, feeling that sense of nationhood. It wasn't just a song, it was a vision, a dream of freedom, of dignity, of being a people that stood on our own 2 feet. Today, national pride is sneered at. Sovereignty is treated like a relic. We're told that loving your country or defending your culture is something to be ashamed of, that it's somehow dangerous. Loving Ireland is not extremism. Listening to the people is not fascism. And wanting control over our own lives is not radical. It's normal. I'm John O'Brien. I work with the think tank MCC Brussels. 2 years ago, I got an invite to help set up a think tank that would fight some of the more crazy policies that come from the EU, and to stand up for nation states. Backed by a Hungarian educational institution, we publish original research, we use our media, we've got a very strong YouTube channel, and we use these mechanisms, and we have meetings like this one, to shine a light on what the elites are doing in Brussels to undermine the nation state. And what a job they're doing. Look at the rules we now live under. From climate to farming, from immigration to finance. You've got to ask yourself, who's really in charge? Europe has replaced politics with accounting. The EU doesn't trust nations. It wants regions, targets, directives. We have the European Central Bank, as was referred to earlier on, running monetary policy. The language they use, they talk about you're a member state, not a nation state. Brussels is telling us how much carbon we can breathe. Fisheries rules are written without Irish fishermen at the table. And yes, the suggestion that we should cull our national cattle herd to please target climate targets. I met Helen O'Sullivan, a cattle farmer from County Cork. She has a beautiful herd, a beautiful farm. She travelled all the way to Brussels in order to protest this madness that she knows is going to drive Irish farmers off the land. Shame that, RTE and the Irish Times didn't have the time to actually come along and hear what she had to say, but many other in the media did. The past 15 years has seen an accelerating expansion of powers of the European Commission, resulting in a major transfer of sovereignty from the national to the supranational level. This game-changing power shift has been managed through a process of competence creep. Outside of the area of democratic debate, it's not something that they're asking your opinion on. And it's that competence creep that we wrote about in one of our reports. We call it the silent coup, because it's not a coup that you will hear about, that you'll see, but it is one that's very real, written by a brilliant Italian journalist called Thomas Fazzi for MCC Brussels. And what Thomas writes is that from its inception in the 1950s, the EC was created as a supranational European institution, the least, not really subject to any form of democratic accountability. These problems have only intensified as the EC has developed from a technical body into a fully fledged political actor, occupying centre stage in the EU. EU politics have undergone a process of supranationalisation and commiseration as the Commission has increased its influence over areas of competence that have previously been considered the preserve of national governments, from financial budgets and health policy to foreign affairs and defence. In recent years, the EC has used its responses to a series of crises. Believe me, these guys don't let any crisis go to waste. The Euro crisis, the Brexit crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, the Ukraine war, they use all these to assume more authority and make emergency decisions, for example, on vaccines or on sanctions. That leads to permanent changes in the exercises of EU power. This use of politics, this use of the politics of perma-crisis. In other words, there's always a permanent crisis going on somewhere, so we have to step in. That's used to expand the reach and power of the Commission, and it's reached new heights under the regime of the current President Ursula von der Leyen in response to COVID-19 and the Ukraine crisis. They don't call her Queen Ursula for nothing. The COVID-19 pandemic marked a turning point in the Commission's role, with von der Leyen taking a leading role in the EU's economic recovery and vaccine procurement efforts. The ongoing Pfizergate scandal around von der Leyen's autocratic handling of the COVID vaccine policy typifies the lack of transparency in the current exercise of power in the EU. Similarly, the Ukraine war has been used by von der Leyen to further expand the Commission's influence, particularly in foreign policy and sanctions against Russia. This has shifted the EU's geopolitical stance, aligning it more closely with NATO and US interests. Von der Leyen's boast at the European Parliament after the Russian invasion of Ukraine that European security and defence had evolved more in the last 6 days than it had in the last 2 decades demonstrates the accelerating pace of this commissionization of politics in Europe. The report we wrote highlights concerns over the erosion of national sovereignty, as the Commission has increasingly imposed its will on member states, often using financial tools and conditionalities. Mechanisms like the rule of law conditionality allow the Commission to withhold funds from states that do not align with its policies. So it further centralizes the power. The Commission may not always hold the whip in hand. It doesn't always have to, because the EU has a labyrinth power structure which involves supranational bodies, the European Commission, the European Central Bank, the European Court of Justice, quasi-federal bodies like the European Parliament, and intergovernmental bodies, the European Council, the Council of Ministers. These are all on top of the member states. It can be hard to see who's in charge, but one thing we know for sure is that all of these components of EU power work together to ensure that Europe's citizens are not the ones in the driving seat. Nor is this simply a problem of national versus supranational sovereignty, although that is a problem. Recent history shows how national political elites can collude with Brussels against their populist opponents in Europe, notably Hungary, and even against their own electorates at home. The biggest losers in the shift of power towards the unaccountable European Commission are the demos, the peoples of Europe. We urgently, I think, need to make reforms to make the European Union more democratic by returning powers to nation states and to make the European Commission less powerful and more accountable. Populism is not a threat to democracy. It is democracy, the demos, the people, raising their voices when the elites are not listening. The establishment doesn't fear fascism. It fears competition. It fears people thinking for themselves. Let me leave you with this. Ireland was not born to be a region in a bureaucracy. We're not a spreadsheet. We are a nation with a soul, a voice, and a history worth fighting for. We must not let Brussels dictate who we are. We must not let the smug elites erase our voice. Sovereignty is not isolation. It's about accountability. It's about freedom. It's about dignity. What troubles me most from Brussels to Berlin to Dublin is the narrative we hear in political circles and the media, the idea that populism is synonymous with extremism or fascism. It's not only misguided, it's dangerous. Populism is not a threat to democracy. In fact, it may be democracy's last defense. Thank you.